The first thing you notice about a place like this isn't the eerie silence or the faint smell of mildew. It's the way the darkness feels. Heavy, like it's pressing down on you, daring you to turn back. That's what hit me as soon as I stepped into the lobby of the Cross Hill Motel. It was supposed to be a quick gig, an easy paycheck, but within minutes, I knew I'd walked into something far from ordinary. I should have known better. When you're broke and desperate, you convince yourself to overlook certain red flags. Like why a motel in the middle of nowhere would offer a paycheck so generous it felt too good to be true. Or why they didn't ask for references or much of anything when I applied. I could almost hear my mom's voice in my head as I signed the contract. Nothing in life comes without a price. Kid, I didn't realize just how right she was until that night. The Cross Hill Motel wasn't your average roadside inn. Sure, it had the usual faded neon sign flickering, vacancy, and a gravel parking lot with a couple of beat-up trucks. But there was something off about it. The lobby was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb that hummed louder than it should have. The wallpaper, once cream-colored, had aged into a sickly yellow. A lone desk bell sat on the counter, its metal dulled with age, but no one came to greet me when I rang it. The silence was unnerving. It wasn't the peaceful kind, like when you're alone with your thoughts. This was the kind of silence that made you hyper-aware of every little sound. Your own breathing, the creak of the wooden floorboards under your weight, the faint rustle of something you couldn't see. As I stood there, waiting for someone to appear, I started questioning my decision. But then I reminded myself why I was here in the first place. Rent was due, bills were piling up, and I didn't have many options. The Cross Hill Motel had offered me a job when no one else would. First shift. The voice came from behind me, making me jump. I spun around to see a wiry old man standing there, holding a ring of keys that jangled with every step. He looked me over like he was sizing me up, then tossed the keys onto the counter with a smirk. "You're braver than most," he said. I forced a smile, pretending I wasn't unnerved. "Just here to do the job." He raised an eyebrow. "Well, let's see if you last the night." He didn't wait for me to respond, just slid a piece of paper across the counter. It was a list of rules, handwritten in shaky block letters. Always lock the front door after 10 p.m. Don't go into room 6 for any reason. If you hear footsteps in the hallway but don't see anyone, don't look for them. Under no circumstances should you answer the phone after midnight. I stared at the list, half expecting him to laugh and say it was some sort of initiation joke. But his expression stayed dead serious. "What happens if I break one?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shrugged. "You don't want to find out." Part of me wanted to walk out right then and there, leave the keys on the counter and pretend this whole thing never happened. But then I thought about my landlord banging on my door and the empty pantry waiting for me at home. "You can do this," I told myself. "It's just one night." I shoved the rules into my pocket and tried not to let my nerves show as the old man disappeared into the night. Now it was just me and the motel. The night started out uneventful. I did what I was supposed to. Checked the locks, flipped through an old logbook, and tried to keep myself busy. But around 11 p.m., things started to feel strange. It wasn't any one thing I could point to, more like a feeling. Like the air had shifted, growing colder even though the thermostat hadn't changed. The hum of the overhead bulb sounded more like a whisper now, low and insistent. And then I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint at first, barely noticeable, but they grew louder with each passing second. Slow, deliberate steps moving down the hallway just beyond the lobby. I froze, my pulse quickening. Stay calm, I thought. It's probably just one of the guests. But when I stepped to the edge of the counter and peeked into the hallway, there was no one there. The footsteps stopped. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting the strange atmosphere get to me. But as I turned back to the desk, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the lobby's glass door. A shadow. It wasn't mine. That's when I remembered the old man's warning. Let's see if you last the night. I'd brushed it off earlier, but now those words echoed in my mind. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't normal. And I had a sinking feeling I'd barely scratched the surface of what this job had in store for me. As I sat back down at the desk, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, I glanced at the list of rules again. This time, they didn't seem ridiculous. They felt like the only thing keeping me alive. The list of rules sat on the desk in front of me, its edges worn and curling like it had been handled 100 times before. The handwriting was uneven, almost frantic, as if whoever wrote it was in a hurry or scared. I had read through them once already, but my eyes kept going back to one line. If you hear footsteps in the hallway but don't see anyone, don't look for them. I couldn't stop thinking about the sound I'd heard earlier. The slow, deliberate steps that had echoed through the empty corridor. I convinced myself it was nothing, just old pipes or the wind shifting the building. But now, with the list of rules in front of me, it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a warning. The old man hadn't explained much before leaving. He tossed me the keys, mumbled something about locking the door at 10 p.m., and disappeared into the night. No introductions, no tour, no reassurance, just me, the motel, and these rules. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. It was almost midnight now, and the unease that had crept in earlier was digging its claws deeper. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something I couldn't see but could definitely feel. I leaned back in the creaky chair behind the desk, reading the rules again. Always lock the front door after 10 p.m. Don't go into room 6 for any reason. If you hear footsteps in the hallway but don't see anyone, don't look for them. Under no circumstances should you answer the phone after midnight. It didn't make sense. Why would a motel, of all places, have rules like this? What could possibly happen in room 6? And why would answering the phone be dangerous? I shook my head and muttered under my breath, "This place is insane," but the truth was I wasn't laughing. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the phone on the desk rang. I jumped so hard that I nearly knocked over the chair. My heart hammered as the shrill sound filled the empty lobby. It was the old-fashioned kind of phone with a rotary dial and a cracked receiver. I stared at it, frozen. My first instinct was to pick it up. It's just a phone, after all. But then I remembered the rule. Under no circumstances should you answer the phone after midnight. The ringing seemed to grow louder, sharper, like it was daring me to break the rule. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay put. Don't answer it. Just let it ring. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Felt heavier, almost suffocating. I let out a shaky breath and sat back down, trying to convince myself I'd done the right thing. But a part of me couldn't help wondering, what would have happened if I'd answered? As I tried to calm my nerves, I noticed something sticking out from under the desk blotter. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I pulled it out and unfolded it carefully, revealing more shaky handwriting. The note was short, but it sent a chill down my spine. The rules are for your protection. Do not break them. Trust me. I frowned, turning the paper over, but there was nothing else. No signature, no explanation, just those haunting words. My protection? From what? I looked around the empty lobby, the flickering bulb overhead casting long shadows against the walls. The building creaked faintly, like it was settling, but it felt more alive than it should have. Great, I muttered. Now I'm paranoid. I decided to check the guest log, hoping it would distract me. The leather-bound book was thick, its pages filled with names, dates, and room assignments written in neat columns. Most of the entries were old, some going back decades. As I flipped through the pages, one thing stood out: Room 6. Unlike the other rooms, which had consistent entries over the years, Room 6 seemed to have long gaps where no one stayed there. The last entry was over 2 years ago, and even that one had been scratched out so violently the paper was torn. I ran my finger over the damaged page, a knot forming in my stomach. Something had happened in that room, something they didn't want anyone to know about. The quiet of the motel was suddenly broken by a loud thud from upstairs. It wasn't subtle, more like something heavy being dropped. I froze, listening intently. The thud was followed by a scraping sound, like furniture being dragged across the floor. The problem was, there shouldn't have been anyone upstairs. I hadn't checked anyone into the motel since I arrived. My first instinct was to grab the keys and investigate, but then I remembered the rules. If you hear footsteps in the hallway but don't see anyone, don't look for them. I wasn't sure if this counted as footsteps, but the thought of breaking the rule sent a shiver down my spine. Instead, I grabbed the flashlight from under the desk and aimed it toward the staircase. The beam of light barely reached the top of the stairs, but I didn't see anything out of place. "Hello," I called out, my voice unsteady. No answer. I spent the next hour jumping at every little noise. The pipes groaned, the wind rattled the windows, and every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake it, no matter how many times I checked the locks or peered out the window. It was like the shadows themselves were alive, shifting and stretching just out of sight. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just a creepy old building. It was something more. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the phone rang again. This time, I didn't jump. I didn't even move. I just stared at it, my mind racing. What if it wasn't a threat? What if it was someone trying to warn me about something worse? But before I could decide, the ringing stopped. And then, somewhere in the distance, I heard it again, the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps in the hallway. This time, they didn't stop. They were coming closer. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the lobby, and the quiet that followed wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. I clutched the receiver in my hand, my breath shallow, my pulse racing. The phone was dead, but the voice I'd heard still echoed in my ears. "You shouldn't have answered." A faint sound broke through the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was close, too close. It was the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, and not mine. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The breathing stopped. I fumbled for the flashlight, my hands shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. When the beam of light finally cut through the darkness, the lobby looked the same as before, but it felt different. The list of rules was still on the desk. I grabbed it, clutching it like it could protect me. My eyes scanned the paper, desperate for something I'd missed, something that could help me. And then I heard it, footsteps. Not faint this time, heavy, deliberate, coming down the hallway toward the lobby. I backed up instinctively, the flashlight beam jittering against the walls. My heart pounded as the footsteps grew louder. They stopped just outside the lobby door. I held my breath, praying that whoever or whatever it was would go away. But then the doorknob turned. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. My flashlight flickered, the beam struggling to stay steady. I aimed it toward the doorway, expecting to see a person, an animal, anything. But there was nothing there. The door swung shut with a soft click, and the footsteps started again, this time circling the desk. I spun around, the flashlight beam following the sound. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The footsteps stopped, and then, as if in answer, a deep, guttural whisper filled the room. "Why are you here?" My chest tightened. The flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. Tall, shadowy, its features blurred. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This can't be real. It's not real. But it was. The figure moved toward me, slow and deliberate. I turned and ran. The list of rules crumpled in my fist. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. The hallway stretched out in front of me. The doors to the rooms on either side closed and silent. But when I reached room 6, I stopped. The door was wide open. I knew I wasn't supposed to go inside. The rules had been clear, but the sound of footsteps behind me pushed me forward. I stepped into the room, slamming the door shut behind me. The room was cold, unnaturally cold. The curtains fluttered gently, even though the windows were shut. The smell of metal and decay filled the air, making me gag. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room stood an old mirror, its surface warped and cracked. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't right. My eyes in the mirror weren't mine. They were dark, hollow, filled with something that didn't belong to me. And then my reflection smiled. A slow, sinister grin that sent chills down my spine. "Why did you come here?" it asked, the voice deep and inhuman. "I didn't mean to," I whispered. You broke the rules." The mirror shattered, the sound deafening in the small room. Shards of glass flew toward me, but instead of hitting the floor, they hovered in the air, spinning slowly. The pieces began to reassemble, forming a shape, something that wasn't human. Its face was featureless, its body made of jagged edges and shadows. It stepped toward me, the room growing colder with each movement. I backed up until I hit the wall, my breathing ragged. "Please," I begged. "I'll leave. I won't come back. Just let me go." The figure tilted its head, as if considering my words. "You are already part of this," it said, its voice like nails on glass. "There is no leaving." The door behind me flew open, and I didn't hesitate. I ran. The hallway felt longer than before, the air thick and heavy. The footsteps were back, echoing behind me, faster now, more frantic. I burst into the lobby, my flashlight flickering wildly. The list of rules lay on the desk, untouched, as if mocking me. I grabbed it, my eyes scanning for anything that could help. A new line had appeared at the bottom of the page. "Once they see you, they will never stop." The phone rang. I ignored it. The footsteps were getting closer. I could feel the cold seeping into the room, the lights dimming. The motel was alive now, feeding off my fear, its walls pulsing like a heartbeat. I didn't know where to go or what to do. All I knew was that I was running out of time. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, the air thick with an unnatural chill. I clutched the crumpled list of rules in my hand, its corners digging into my palm as if grounding me in the reality of this nightmare. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence that replaced them was worse. It was alive, a tangible void pressing against my eardrums. Room 6. Its door stood ajar, a black maw inviting me into its depths. I knew better than to enter, but the relentless whispers behind me left no choice. They were closing in, suffocating, driving me forward. I crossed the threshold, slamming the door shut behind me. The room's temperature dropped instantly, my breath visible in short, panicked bursts. The furnishings were sparse, nondescript. A bed, a nightstand, a cracked lamp. But in the corner stood a mirror, ancient and tarnished, its surface rippling like disturbed water. I avoided my reflection, instinctively knowing I wouldn't like what I saw. Instead, I scanned the room for anything, a weapon, an exit, a clue. But the room offered nothing but its oppressive atmosphere and the steady hum of the mirror, now pulsating softly, like a heartbeat. "Why are you here?" The voice was guttural, disembodied, vibrating through the walls. I spun around, flashlight beam darting wildly. No one, just the mirror, its surface now glowing faintly, distorting the room's reflection. My knees buckled as I caught a glimpse of my own image. I stared back, but it wasn't me. The eyes were black voids, the mouth curled in a grotesque smile. And then it spoke. "You broke the rules." I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. "I didn't mean to," I whispered, my voice trembling. I didn't know." The figure in the mirror tilted its head, mimicking my movements with eerie precision. "Once you're seen, there is no escape." The glass cracked, thin lines spidering across its surface. My reflection fragmented, each shard showing a different version of me. Screaming, crying, silent with empty eyes. And then, with a deafening shatter, the mirror exploded. Shards hovered in the air, suspended, spinning slowly like a macabre constellation. From the fragments emerged a shape, a figure composed of jagged glass and shadow. It towered over me, faceless yet undeniably aware. The room seemed to contract around it, the walls bending inward, pulling me closer to the entity. I bolted for the door, my hand grasping the knob, but it wouldn't budge. The metal was freezing, burning my skin. Behind me, the creature moved, its presence filling the room with an unbearable weight. "You can't leave," it hissed, its voice like grinding glass. "You belong here now." Desperation surged through me. I yanked the door with all my strength, and suddenly, it gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, the sound of shattering glass echoing behind me. The motel groaned, its walls pulsating as if alive, angry at my escape. I ran blindly, the rules still clutched in my hand. My flashlight flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of the warped hallway. Doors slammed shut as I passed, the whispers growing louder, overlapping into a cacophony of rage. The lobby was ahead, its dim light a beacon in the darkness. I burst through the door, tripping over the desk chair and sprawling onto the floor. The list of rules slipped from my grasp, fluttering to the ground. A new line had appeared, written in the same shaky hand. "Once they see you, they will never stop." The phone rang. I froze, my body paralyzed by the sound. It rang again, each shrill tone slicing through the heavy silence. My eyes locked onto it, the cracked receiver trembling on the desk. "Don't," I whispered to myself. "Don't answer it." The ringing stopped. For a brief moment, the lobby was silent, still. And then the shadows moved. They coalesced, pooling into a form that stood just beyond the desk. It had no features, just a void where its face should be. The whispers returned, low and insidious, crawling under my skin. "You should have stayed," it said. I scrambled to my feet, backing toward the door. The figure didn't follow, but its presence pressed against me, a suffocating force that promised I wouldn't get far. The night air hit me like a slap as I stumbled outside. I didn't look back. The gravel crunched under my feet as I ran, my lungs burning, my mind screaming at me to keep going. The motel's sign flickered in the distance, its vacancy light sputtering one last time before plunging into darkness. Even as I reached the main road, the feeling lingered, that I was being watched, that the motel wasn't finished with me. Weeks later, I still can't sleep. Shadows move where they shouldn't, and the whispers haven't stopped. I know now that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. If you ever see a place like Cross Hill Motel, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back. Because once they see you, they will never let you go. Subscribe for more horror stories every day.